Um, Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar on language translation. It's about just over 15 minutes long, and we'll go straight into a Q&A then. You can ask questions at any point throughout, put them into the questions panel, and we'll get to them at the end then. So let's get started.
Welcome to today's tutorial. Today we will be discussing Cscape language translation and font handling. Let's talk about Cscape language translation. It's the ability to support multiple languages in a single project so that operators at runtime can select an appropriate language for them. You can support up to 24 languages in a single project. However, translation is done manually. Inside the memory, the OCS maintains multiple versions of all text that shows up on screen. When the user changes the language on the fly, a different set of text strings will be displayed. There's a process you need to go through when you are supporting multiple languages. Firstly, you need to design the user interface of your project. Start with your primary language. In my case, it's English. You should leave space in your objects for longer strings for languages that use longer sentences. Next, go to the graphics editor in Cscape. From a special menu, export all these text fields and then perform a paste operation into a spreadsheet. In column A of your spreadsheet, there are all the different text strings that are used in your OCS project. If you're going to support 24 languages, you can fill in all of the different text strings for each language that you want displayed, from column B to column X. When you're done with that process, highlight all the cells that you want to paste back into Cscape, copy them, and paste to the same menu where you began. We will show you this process with a demonstration now. Okay, I have a simple demo program with little ladder logic. Let's take a look at the user interface. My primary screen is made up of the selector object with a language selection. It's a 4-position vertical selector. Let me show you how it's configured. I'll double click here. I've assigned a variable called language to this selector. There are 4 selections. Each of the items can be configured from here. Item 1 says English item. Item 2 says Deutsche. Item 3 says Idioma. And item 4 says Français. So those are my 4 choices for language. And please excuse my pronunciation of those. That's pretty much all that's on this screen, except for this jump button, which takes me to screen number 2, my operator station. This is a simple start-stop operator station, where I labeled the whole screen as operator station. I labeled this area as pump control. I have a text table object here, labeled water level, and this is a selectable water level. I'll double click on this text table object, and I'll look at the text table here. This is text table number 1, and currently the text table is going to be selecting between low, medium, and high. Now the longest string here is medium, which would be 7 characters, but I've assigned more than 7. When you're doing a project with multiple languages, we're probably developing around English, but other languages have longer sentences or words than English, so it's a good idea to put extra space in your objects. So I've developed this very simple project with 2 screens, several objects on it, and I've put the text where I want it. I'm ready to move on to the multiple language portion of the project. I do that from the graphics editor. From the pull-down area here, there's a menu called Language, and here under Options, I can assign a language switch register. I'm programming this in traditional advanced ladder. It'd be the same with advanced ladder with tags. So I'm going to assign the same selector register that I use for languages on the first screen. I had named that variable language, and it's mapped to R1. The next thing I have to assign is how many languages I will support in this project. I'm going to support 4, but you can have up to 24. Now, some languages are read from right to left as opposed to left to right, so you can identify which ones are right to left languages. In my case, none of them are, so I'll hit cancel here. Okay, so I've now assigned my language switch register. I've said I'm going to have 4 languages. I'll hit OK. If we take a look at these 4 languages that I've set up, this is English, German, Spanish, and French. If Google Translate was wrong, then I guess I'm wrong too. Let's download this project to our controller. I'll fast forward through this process. I haven't plugged in any alternative language strings, so let's see what we've got. I've got my two screens I can switch between. I can start and stop my pump. Everything's in English. I can change from high, medium to low water level. At the moment, everything looks good. Now, if I hit one of these other buttons, I have question marks everywhere. That's because I haven't loaded any additional strings besides what's in there for my primary language. So that's the next step. So we're back into Cscape to the graphics editor, and I'm going to go to the language menu. But this time I'll hit the export selection. It's told me that the export to the clipboard is complete. Okay, so I've opened my spreadsheet here. I'll hit paste, and into the first column go all of the strings that I used in my program. Now it's just a matter of filling in these other columns. I've stretched out these columns here, and I'm going to put in headings to make it easy for me to keep track of things. I'll name them English, German, Spanish, and French. That'll help keep track of things. As an example, here I've gone to Google Translate. I'm going to type in one of the terms I need, which is water level. That's my German translation there. Now I'm going to do it in Spanish. There's my Spanish translation. And now finally I'm going to do it in French. And there you can see the French translation. Okay, so we're going back to the spreadsheet to fill in this information. I'll fast forward through this process. Remember, I added my own row at the top that I'm going to skip when I do the copy and paste back into Cscape. I've highlighted the section that contains the terms that are in the Cscape project. I'll right click and hit copy. Now, back to the graphics editor, to the language pull down menu. We're going to press import. It asks if I'm sure I want to overwrite the current strings. Say yes. Now we're going to test it. We'll go back to the language menu, and under display language, change from the primary language and see what we get. We've switched to German. We'll look at the next page, which looks like German to me, so it appears to have worked. Let's do a download and see if it works on the unit itself. Okay, here's our unit. We've got English, German, Spanish, French. Let's leave it on Spanish and switch. Here's our pump screen. There's all the translation that's been done. Let's go back here and let's switch to German. These translations are probably inaccurate because I used Google Translate. Okay, let's switch to French. I didn't put in any special characters, the accented vowels, as this is just a quick demo. Those can be put in with XML when you're doing translations. This appears to have worked well. Hopefully you've got a good feel for how Cscape Language Translation works in the OCS. Now let's talk about Cscape font handling. Cscape has several built-in fonts. Depending on the controller you're using, the fonts may vary. Cscape also has some tools for customizing fonts. Their tools include the Font Manager, the Font Creation Wizard, and the legacy tool called the Font Editor. The Font Editor won't be covered today, as it's a bit redundant. Everything you need to do with fonts can be done with the Font Manager and the Font Creation Wizard. Now we'll talk about ASCII versus Unicode. ASCII and Unicode are character encoding standards. ASCII has been around much longer, it's the original standard, and supports up to 128 characters. You won't be able to support very many languages with the ASCII character set, as it's a bit small. Unicode is a much newer standard, which supports over 1 million characters. Supporting multiple languages with this character set is easy. Unicode is backwards compatible with ASCII. The first section of Unicode, the lower 128 characters, are identical to ASCII. Because of the high number of characters per character set, Unicode can require a lot of storage. The OCS has a limited amount of space to store custom fonts. Let's talk about the Font Manager tool. This is available in the graphics editor from the Tools menu and allows you to add or delete additional Cscape fonts to the project. Cscape fonts are residing in the font folder and they have .fnt as their file extension. If you look in the default installation of Cscape in the fonts folder, you will find a couple of fonts in the system. In addition to these .fnt files, other fonts can be created or imported using the Font Creation Wizard. The Font Creation Wizard is a tool for importing TrueType fonts and creating .fnt files. You can import any true type font that's on your computer, any size that will fit. Additional fonts can be purchased or downloaded from the web for import. Many free fonts are only free for personal use and are not free for business use unless you license them. Now let me show you a demonstration of font handling. So I'm back in Cscape. I've added a little bit to the project, but not much. I've added this jump button that'll take me to a new screen. The function of this new screen is to display a pressure value in a pretty large font. So hopefully a maintenance person who's working on the machine can see the pressure reading from a reasonable distance away. This is currently the biggest font that's included with the X4, and it's not that big. I'd prefer to have a much bigger font here. I'm going to show you how to create a new font or import a font in a custom size. The first step in importing a new font is to go to the Tools menu from the graphics editor. I'll go to the Font Manager first. This is where we can add a pre-existing font. Let's see if there's a big font available for us to load that's already been created. We'll hit the Add button and go to the Cscape folder, which is under Program Files, x86, Cscape, Fonts. There are two fonts here. System Font, which is good for retrofits, and Tiny Font, which is not a large font. I'm going to hit Cancel here because we don't have the font that I'm looking for. I'm going to exit the Font Manager. So when I want to create a new font, I'll go into the Font Creation Wizard. Let's open it. Okay, I have three choices here. I can select an ASCII font, a complete Unicode font, or a subset of a Unicode font. I'll select the last option here for illustrative purposes, which means I can select a subset of a full Unicode font. Under the font list, we have all the fonts that are loaded on the computer. I have tons of fonts. I'm just going to pick the first one, Agency FB. Under font size here, I'm going to select a much larger size, let's say 72 points or so. There we go. Next, I need to select what portion of the font character set that I want to import. Let's hit the subset ranges lookup table so we can see what's available. I don't need any of these special character sets, as the languages that I've selected don't use them. So I'll stick with the initial subset, which correlates to ASCII as they all do. I'll go with the basic Latin for both the beginning and the end, and then I decide where I'm going to store this font once I create it. Cscape has a default location where you're encouraged to store the file, so I'll use that here. This is the fonts folder. Instead of calling it untitled, I'll select Agency FB _72. I'm just going to pick a regular bold font, so 72 point bold, I'm storing it as Agency FB 72. The last option here is whether I want to add the generated font file to the project automatically or not. I'm going to use this font on this project, so I might as well add it automatically. If I uncheck this after creating the font, I'd have to go back into the Font Manager and manually add the font in. I'll hit Create Font and I finish. Now just to check my work, let's go back into the Font Manager. And sure enough, Agency FB 72 is there. There were up to 128 characters available with ASCII for this particular font. They only had 96 level maps, so that saved some space. 134,992 bits is how much space is being taken up by this font. That number is important because every OCS has a limited amount of font space. Smaller OCSs have less allocated space. I'll show you now how you can check if there's enough space. I'll hit OK here and I'll open my error check tools. I'll start with the one in the graphics editor, but it doesn't help me much. It tells me the font size, but it doesn't tell me a percentage of usage, which is what I need. To get that information, I'm going to leave the graphics editor, go into the main Cscape editor, and select the error check here. It not only tells you the number of bytes you're using, but the percentage that you're full. In this case, for an X4, we used up about half of the font memory with this one custom font. But that's okay, the default fonts are going to be used for everything else. The most important thing is I'm below 100%, so I know that this download will work. Let's go back into the graphics editor. Let me maximize that view and go to the page that has the big PSI reading on it. I'm going to go here into the font size and pick Agency FB 72. I'll hit OK. Now we've got a much bigger font. I'll make this a bit bigger and move it up a little bit. We'll have to stretch them out if we're getting engineering units on this. Now that's what I was looking for. Let's go ahead and download it to the controller and see what it looks like. We're back on our main screen. Let's switch over to the PSI screen. There's a much larger font for displaying numeric data from a distance. Hopefully that'll give you a good idea as to what's involved in importing fonts and using them in your project. Once you've created a font, you don't have to create it multiple times. At this point, it's stored in your fonts folder. You can use the font manager to load that into a new project that you create from scratch. Okay, so that was font handling in the OCS. Thank you for attending today's tutorial. The Q&A session will begin shortly.
Okay, a nice and short one this morning for you. Let's see if we have any questions in. How many languages do we support? Up to 24. That is the limit. Can we change the language through register? Yes, in the graphics editor earlier in the presentation, under the language tab, you'll see the option to have the switching register. So you can just use that register to switch between the languages as well. That is also an option. Is there anything else coming in? No, I don't see anything else at the moment. I'll take you to the webinar page again, if you bear with me. Okay, so we have real-time clock coming up next week. And then the following weeks, we have integrating stepper motors and wiring OCS. So the registration links are there if you would like to do them. And we'd love it if you could join us for those. And always, we've our past ones here. We'll upload this one today. We'll just do a quick edit on it. We'll get it uploaded for you. Just see if there's any more questions coming in. No. Yeah, so we'd love to see you next week and in future weeks for our webinars. Thank you all for joining us this morning, and have a nice day.